Yeah. So when you start to look at the contact time to velocity, and actually does that start to indicate when players might be showing increased contact time? Is that a case? Then that's related to fatigue, as we've seen within previous data.
So increased contact time for the same velocity.
Yeah, correct.
Kind of an efficiency or kind of a ratio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it'd be good to get your opinion, Mark, but that for me is like, it's an open kind of environment, it's an applied setting, and it's something that could be useful. We still need more context and insights behind it, but that might be part of the way to start exploring these kind of insights.
All right. Today we have. I have the great pleasure to welcome Steve, my friend Steve Barrett, on the show. Steve, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Martin. How are you today?
Very well. Pretty excited to have you with us. There's so much anecdotes I could start with about, let's say, how we got to know each other and the different stuff, the billions of projects we had and we still have together. As an intro, but I'm sure just to introduce yourself, you'll do a better job about what you're doing at the moment.
No, but first of all, thank you for the kind words, and I think this is a great initiative that you and Paul have started up. So really looking forward to seeing how it grows as well. So my name's Steve Barrett. I'm Director of Sports Science and Research Innovation for a company called Player Maker, which is a foot-mounted inertial measurement unit that sits on the football boots. But previously to this, I was a practitioner for the last 15 years, worked at Hull City, worked with the England women's teams, mainly within the youth setups. Also worked at Scunthorpe United and also a sports technology company before called Perform Better, which many people in the UK and Europe will be aware of as well. And obviously, as most people do in this industry, a few internships previously to that as well along the way. So.
Excellent. Thanks for that. And that's why I wanted to bring you on the show. Like most of the people we're going to interview are definitely practitioners and discussing a lot of their own practice. But what I like with you, having been in, let's say, both world and the technology world, to bring the discussion more around the technology side of the things, but not having just someone selling products, but having someone that has worked in the field and really knows what the products are needed for. And I know you have a very, very special, you have special expectation on about the technology side of the things. So you mentioned in Player Maker, this is where you work at the moment. I don't think this is going to be a sales pitch for any of the company anyway, but what made you make this move, and why do you think Player Maker is going to be, what was the decision for you to work for them?
Yeah, I think just to hit that point, it's like, I suppose, like, no matter what industry you work in, you're some form of salesman. I always say I'm not a salesman. Like, I just speak passionately about products and things that I'm interested in, and I'm sure we'll get to it later on in the podcast, whereby if you speak passionately about something and you're really interested in it, all of a sudden it doesn't become a job. Like, the best, I always got given the advice that actually, like, you'll never work a day in your life if you enjoy your job, because it's not that, which I think a lot of people within our industry are blessed and fortunate to probably get that. Coming back to Player Maker, I actually, again, as you do when you work in the club, you look for new innovations, you look for new pieces. We're missing this answer from a performance question. So when I was at Hull with a load of my colleagues, we were brainstorming and trying to say, well, actually from this perspective, we're missing, how can we quantify technical load? Now, I use that term load loosely, especially with some of the research papers coming out about terminology. But we're missing a way to actually quantify the technical actions that players were doing in training and in match play as well. And how would that then help inform our rehab process? Because we saw, I think the good thing about Hull, and when we saw changes in managers, obviously there was increases in different training demands that weren't always explained by what we're seeing with our other wearable technology solutions. So we wanted to make sure we were trying to answer that question. And we even tried our analysts manually coding training, and they hated me for that. because it took them like 2 or 3 hours for like one warm-up drill where we had multiple balls in the drill, and they wanted to hit me over the head with a pool cue the next day as well. So it's we wanted to automate that process and make it easy, and Playmaker was a solution that we saw. We thought, get the guys in. They gave a very good presentation. We demoed it, and I think one of the big things for me was because it's an alien product. Like, to ask professional players to put something on their boots, which is how they make the money, like kicking and running. I was like, we were all a bit skeptic at the time, and so we said, look, like, anyone can feel it, anyone's aware of it, or it's uncomfortable, we don't buy it. Like, so let's test it out. But it was that interesting and that buy-in that our head coach at the time, a guy called Nigel Atkins, who was a former physio, he loved the concept. He put a pair of sensors on, then his assistant manager put them on, first team coach put them on, goalkeeper coach put them on, and they're all really excited about it. I was like, this is the first time I've seen a technology and capabilities like have this impact on players and coach and stuff. And then all of a sudden after the session, everyone couldn't wait to see the information because it was like what they knew and could understand. And so I know this is kind of a long-winded answer, so apologies about this, Martin, but it's like seeing that passion from coaches and the players about the insights that we could provide, and then being able to complete that coaching process was really impactful for me. Like, especially one thing I forgot to mention, I was a football coach before I was a sports scientist, so I worked at Scunthorpe United for 8 years as an academy coach as well, and it's just when you find something that kind of ticks all the boxes from the different key stakeholders in the club, you go, right, that's I think we said it before, the bang for your buck, and yeah, you can have a big impact. So that, when the guys offered me an opportunity after using it for a year in the club for that time, I couldn't turn it down. It was just, the right time, the right place.
Excellent. I definitely will keep on talking about the opportunities that are now at reach with this kind of technology. But just back to your decision from, let's say, leaving the club environment, starting to work in a technology company. Was it like you were at the end of your journey anyway, or you just thought that you may have another ability to have a more impact doing something else? What was more the drive as well for you?
I think there's a couple of different things. Like, I always got advised by one of like the more senior people within my career, so like Rob Price, to kind of, if you hadn't progressed or you hadn't like adapted or developed your position within 5 years' time, you need to reflect and potentially move on.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And I think I've found that advice like really key as well. And I think that was my 5th season at Hull, going into my 6th season. And like I was reflecting on it, I developed within the role in the first couple of years quite quickly, and like was overseeing like sports science and performance analysis then. But then it like was starting to plateau, changing some staff members, and we all know that sometimes you either flourish under different staff members or it goes the other way as well. So I was just at a point where, one, there was the professional side of it I wanted to keep developing. I think most importantly, like, I was keen to actually develop my personal side as well. Mm-hmm. So actually, that's family life. That's making sure that I could see my kids grow up for a period of time as well. Ideally, all the time, as we all know, it's a tough game in professional sport, and I've started to see more and more people come out of professional sport because of that reason. They just want to spend time with the family, and is the time and commitment you put in worth the time that you lose with your family. Now, for me, actually, like, if the job's worth doing, like, that's a commitment that you make, and I enjoyed that for like 15 years. But I think this opportunity now with Playmaker, I probably, even though it's upstairs in an office and that, like, I still work on sociable hours, I still work around the clock, but it's all manageable by me. So that was another opportunity for me to really dive in. And from professional career development, I always knew that those leadership qualities would only come if I challenged myself with a leadership role, something new, something to kind of really challenge myself, both from financial and business elements that maybe I wasn't exposed to as much as what I thought I might have been in the latter part of my Hull City career. So yeah, it was the right challenge, right time, and yeah, it really enjoyed it. And to be honest with you, I'm still enjoying it to this day. So I can't. I look at it and think I made the right decision.
Yeah. No, I can relate. I can relate to that, to a little bit of what I've done as well when the year when I left Paris and joining Kitman, having this opportunity to learn from a world that is not the one we grew and developed in. Of course, there's the sale, the marketing side of the things that we just have to embrace, because that's part of the journey, let's say. But I've learned so much as well on other levels that are not either training related, but as you said, might not be management, but just working with all the types of people, having another working flow, organization, message. So that's in terms of development, for sure. There's a lot of to learn from that. Yeah.
Because how have you found actually like that transition between the two? Was it okay for you, or was it tough at first to get to grips with, and then you're flourishing now? Or
I think that really depends on my side. It's been an easy one, and I think we are the same on that side, because we are pretty, let's say, well organized in terms of with the science background as well. You keep record of what you do, calendars, in terms of track record, messaging, emails. I guess when we were not at the time we kind of left pro sport, we were not the typical gym guy just working on with his whistle and the mini bands. We had this more the academic side of the thing that helps to work remotely. So I mean, from a performance coach to work in this kind of company, you need to have also this more, I don't know how you call that, this digital organization as well. And when I hear the guys at Kitman sometimes trying to seeking for new hires, definitely you need a special type of performance person as well to really match in the company. But then, as you said, and I think we all agree, is that what really makes your value working for a technology company is, of course, your experience as a practitioner, but also to keep the link with the field as much as you can throughout, in my case, it's consultancies, or throughout the regular exposure visits you do in the teams you work with. Because all the questions about, so we can discuss about research, I've discussed more about in other podcasts, but just the way the technology is used, what people are looking for in terms of technology, the fact that how technology is adopted, you only get that when that's the empathy side of the things, to know what the customer wants and can do. And I'd like to hear about that as well. In your case, how do you make sure you keep developing in your role, research development, how you keep developing the technology, but making sure you develop it as the practitioner are actually willing to do it, to see it happening?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of different ways. So to go on, starting with the practitioner element is ultimately the end goal for us is ultimately how can we monitor as much as possible without asking the coaches or the players to change their habits. So Jace Delaney came up with this invisible monitoring kind of process earlier on, but in a few years ago. But realistically, how can we embed technology to actually save the players time and effort? And I think that's one of the big things, is that for me, we talk about ecological validity, and we are still testing using lab-based training systems, or lab-based testing systems, sorry. So VO2 max test, I love them, use them, and I just go to myself, okay, well, how does that apply to the field? Someone that did well on the VO2 max test, not necessarily the best footballer, and it's as crude or as going back to the fundamentals as it sounds. How can we get the most accurate information to provide us information on athletes' performance and reducing their risk of injury, while being able to monitor their dose-response relationships in a way that might be physiological and mechanical? Now, when I look at Playmaker, obviously physiological probably doesn't come into it, but when, as a practitioner, we had a license where we were able to implement things that we wanted to in order to inform the coaching practice, and as long as they could understand and see the benefit of it, we're there. So again, going back through the research, reading Blooming All Roads Lead to Rome paper back in, you'll correct me on the date, Martin, I can't remember when you 2012 maybe, All Roads Lead to Rome paper. And you go, right, well, here's this submaximal test, the concept of running 4 minutes, 12 kilometers per hour, monitoring heart rate. Okay, well, what if we were wearing Playmaker, and what if we were able to get some gait analysis metrics so we could look at the mechanical elements of it as well? So instead of just doing a jog around the pitch, let's just formalize it a bit and say, we're jogging around the pitch, but we're going to do it for 4 minutes, controlled. So here's our controlled dose. Now we can have a look at physiological with the heart rates, mechanical. So all of a sudden, you're getting more bang for your buck. And the biggest challenge that I kind of enjoy within this role is that it's technology, as I mentioned earlier, it impacts different key stakeholders in different ways. So we're both very much on the physical element, but with a large appreciation for the technical and the medical and the performance analysis aspects. Like, this was probably the biggest time saver for the performance analysis department as a whole with regards to providing video and service in training. And likewise, from the medical side, when you look at rehab, and I can't go into too many specific details on the case studies that we've got, but like, I'm really enjoying challenging what has been and developing the future. So it's not just a case I want to develop player makers. How do I develop what we can do within soccer science practice in order to really push and drive systems on for the practitioner? And then that'll impact the journey that we go on in future. And what you do in between that is researchability, reliability work, actually applying it, and look at some of the work. Obviously, I hope you don't mind me saying, Martin, about some of the work we're doing at Lille with like the box-to-box runs, and it's trying to challenge what we've done previously, improve them, to then develop the practitioner's insights further. So it's better messaging and more concise messaging.
Yeah. Maybe it's worth going through a little bit more details in about this idea. You mentioned box-to-box, standardized. What are you looking for to monitor then with those runs?
No worries. So basically, like, when we break it down, we're at the foot level. So one of the big differences, again, going back to my PhD, it was like the location of the device is really challenging what we are able to see and the insights we're able to compare. So not to speak about any other systems, but location in itself is like an issue when it comes to technology. So,
which means that you're still, or you were skeptical about using accelerometry data from a GPS in the back between the shoulder to assess stride parameters? What we've done because we didn't have anything else? Or?
Yeah, I wasn't going to be that blunt, Martin, but yeah, like I think it's part of my PhD, and we did a lot of work, and when you're on a straight line treadmill, and you can get some estimates, but when you compare it to even moving it to the center of mass, like, so the signal difference is massive. And I remember speaking to my PhD supervisor, Rick Lavelle, who obviously we've both done work with as well, Martin. Like the muscle dampening that goes on between, actually, it's a good thing that there's a lower signal in between the shoulder blades, because it means your muscles are working below to absorb those accelerations. But it doesn't mean that we can monitor them and see them accurately. So while it's valid and reliable, and I look back at my PhD and I go, yeah, there's some really useful information in there, but is it going to give us the full picture? And that's where I think having something close to the point of contact to the ground, hopefully in the future, will prove that it's more valuable. So when we look at contact time, flight time, and we talk about that from reactive strength index within the gym, we've never really been able to see it within an open environment, in other drills, where we try to normalize it to the velocity, so then we create this nice profile that I think one of the early bits of research I really got my teeth sunk into and found interesting was this whole concept of actually, when do you time your strength training? I know this is like kind of off topic, but when you time your strength training, if you're fatigued and then you strength train, you actually potentially reduce that
adaptation.
Kind of, yeah.
Yep.
But if you do the strength training there, you still get that decrement. So are you still at risk of injury? And like, for me, that whole concept of, can we actually inform the practitioner when that kind of changing? Yeah. So when you start to look at the contact time to velocity, and actually does that start to indicate when players might be showing increased contact time. Is that a case? Then that's related to fatigue, as we've seen within previous data.
So increased contact time for the same velocity.
Yeah, correct.
Kind of an efficiency or kind of a ratio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it'd be good to get your opinion, Mark, but that for me is like, it's an open kind of environment, it's an applied setting, and it's something that could be useful. We still need more context and insights behind it, but that might be part of the way to start exploring these kind of insights.
Yes. Yeah, you started by talking about your interest for Playmaker, and you talked a lot about the coaching staff being engaged, about the tactical elements or technical elements, the ball contact, the ball release, and these kind of things, which of course is part of it. But as you know, our interest and all the collaboration we have is definitely around this aspect of measuring fatigue without measuring. And to be, let's say, honest with that, I think I've been now in searching around that for more than 10 years, because we know from a lot of different work that, as you said, there is an element that affects running economy when you get tired. So it could be an increase in contact time, which also is related by a change in stiffness, as we say. So there's a lot of theoretical background that actually validates this, but we are still, I think you agree, we are still looking for really objective and clear data in a real case of use. Like you mentioned, the box-to-box like case studies, stuff we're running at Lille at the moment. We talk about that as a case study, but we're implementing that as a monitoring tool almost on a weekly basis in Lille. In Paris, even though we're not using Playmaker, we're using more or less the same, but using the GPS behind the shoulder, trying to get an overview of this neuromuscular status of the players throughout. Like in Paris, we have 6 years of data with some players, and there is always a feel that because of the theory behind, it should be right, and we expect when you have a change in those ratio, players is getting fresher, players are going tired. But again, there's so many other things that can influence that. The decision we can do with those data, and I'd like you to comment on that as well. To me, the decision is not as straightforward as let's say the heart rate side of this standardized run. Heart rate goes down, likely you improve fitness. Heart rate goes up, it's likely you impaired your fitness. That's pretty straightforward. When we look at those metrics from those standardized runs, okay, what about the pitch itself, the grass, the mud?
I'm glad you mentioned that.
So
yeah.
What's the next step to really make so that we can make better decisions? We can be more confident in the value of those changes to really assess better neuromuscular status.
Yeah, and it's controlling the uncontrollable sometimes, and that's why we probably also talk about, especially when we come back to football as well, because of like the open environment, nature, and the chaotic, intermittent fashion of it. We're really still always going, but what about this? What about that? What about that? It's like, so how do you control as many of those factors as possible? And there's ways that we think will relate to what's happened in the lab, but when we take them to the field, then how do we normalize for them being in the field as well? And that's the big challenge that I'm hoping to try and start to answer more questions. But the way I describe it is that ultimately you ask one question and you get an answer. On the back of that answer, you get another 10 questions. And then on the back of the 10 answers there, you get 100 questions. And if we ever answer all the questions, either we'll be multi-billionaires or we'll probably have given up trying and to answer us or ask the most appropriate questions. There's going to be questions coming all the time. And that's why I find it really impactful and really enjoyable, this kind of position, is because it's helping so many different people to answer those questions. It's like you sometimes have, we both had a large number of coaches during our respective times at the different organizations, and the way I communicate messages to one coach was completely different to another coach, and some data one coach would get and another coach wouldn't get because he'd already said that he wasn't interested. Why should I try to force it down his throat? So you're working with people that ultimately have taken an interest in this specific area. And for me, that's where the whole sales comment in. It's like, I'm not a salesperson, but because I speak passionately and can help inform practice, is that actually sales? So let me ask you something. A strength conditioning coach that's trying to get players into the gym, is he trying to sell his services to those players in the gym? And that's where it's that fine balance between ultimately, like, we're probably like mini salespeople within the practitioner world that are just ultimately trying to say, hey, look, I think this will help you. But okay, no, I know it will help you. This is why I know it will help you. Let's try it and then show it. And then you demo it and you show it, the improvement. And that's the biggest thing that we need to do. If you can have an impact and prove that impact on performance or risk of injury and highlight it and evidence-based it, that's the biggest thing, regardless of whatever technology you use, whatever practice or intervention, whether it be like, we used to use the 15 on, 15 off, like interval HIIT runs, like religiously, because with a few players, they could see the benefit and they got quick benefits that they could translate to the pitch as well. That's not just straight line, obviously, the variations between, but the players would feel the adaptation. So that was us selling that kind of concept to them. So then say, look, you perform these kind of HIIT drills that we learned from somewhere like HIIT Science, for example. Thank you, Martin, again. Mm-hmm. Then you go, right, this is it on the field, and all of a sudden we can see that benefit as well.
Yeah. And would you say that to make sure this is adopted, would you need to have, like, again, that's stuff I was discussing in this paper about the load monitoring, heart rate monitoring back in the days, about find the balance or the trade-off between the actual validity of the device, the actual science that is behind, but also the burden to implement and the capacity to test regularly. So you mentioned invisible monitoring, which I think it's really the key. And where do you put the balance between something that looks perfect that you can use only once a month versus having something that is a bit maybe not as clean, as perfect, as valid, but you can use daily? If you take the example of a player maker, for example,
Yeah, exactly. It's asking the right question of any system, and ultimately, like, if you know what the change is going to be, like, and it's consistent change, like, ultimately you can have that knowledge to impact it. Now, I give the example. I could help Player Maker create new metrics tomorrow, and let's say, for example, estimated GRF, for example, and okay, first thing that people will probably ask, is it valid and reliable? And then you take 6 months to a year to investigate if it's valid and reliable. Or you get some practitioners that will go, okay, while you're doing that, I'm going to use that. And if I have confidence in it and I know what a change is, I'm then going to drive on and progress with it as well. Like, this is why you kind of have, like, for me, with my role, these research partners and, like, the people that you can, like, again, using the example of Leo, like, we know that we are in a experimental research phase within this certain area, so therefore we can work together and actually get respective feedback. You guys are getting the information you want, we're getting feedback on how we can develop it and improve it and so on. And that's where kind of the practice to the research to the business element is really powerful.
Yeah, and on that, of course, I guess we both value the information going back and forth between developing something within a product, and I can relate to what I'm doing with Kitman Lab as well, of course, But on the other side, on the club side, you just want the things, you want them tomorrow. And because you want to eventually make decisions based on those data, you need to know how valid it is. You need to know as well what a meaningful change is in this velocity versus contact time ratio, which might be an index of neuromuscular status of fatigue. So how do you deal with this as well? Because as we know, there's such a difference in terms of pace of the pro sports and what can be done in the technology side of the thing. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah. So I have this conversation every day with one of one of the clients I work with, and I even challenged them and put it back on them. Okay, get me a couple of like under 23s or like outside squad players, and run them through this test on, like, let's say a treadmill test, a couple of speeds, 1 minute, so it's 4 minutes work maximum. You want to use that? Let's actually do it here and now. If you wait for us to do it, we've done it internally, but if you wait for a research paper to come out, you're going to have lost potentially a year to 18 months to 2 years, however long it takes. And you know what the review process is like as well. I'm looking forward to, hopefully when we get off this call, a good friend of both of ours, Jo Clubb, she's just got a paper published, but it was rejected 9 times. And she started the research project in 2016. So if we waited for her information to actually impart that on our practice when I was at Hull, like, I wouldn't have been able to use it.
No way.
So
exactly.
So I think I put it back on the clubs as well. And if the clubs aren't willing to do that work, it's okay, use it. You won't know whether or not it's a change, and you'll be asking many questions. So I think it's important that, and we used to do it all the time, like one of the first player maker research studies was when I was at Hull. We had a part-time master's student, and I basically said to him, right, your project is, we've seen the value in this, just quickly do this test, check its validity, reliability, and then let's monitor training, because that's the, I don't want to say that's the fun bit, but that's the underpinning bit for what we do there. And we did it, and it's not quick. We had that knowledge in the club, but by the time it gets published, it's 2 years later. And Hull City have had a competitive advantage by knowing that this is the information and what is a change and so on. So it's the internal research that you can do quickly, and it only needs a couple of staff members to just go challenge it, just to get an idea.
Enough for that, because you mentioned twice once the paper is published, but in this case, the guys at the club, they don't give anything. They don't care about the publication. They just want to know if they can use this metric and how they're gonna use it. So yeah, I like the idea of kind of translating the research setup within the actual club so that they have a better control. And that's stuff that we try to do with in Paris when I was working with Mathieu Lacombe as well. That was definitely the idea, to get things done ourselves. But sure, having the support from a company from the outside in terms of at least the devices. Would you, again, I'm sure you guys will be involved in the data analysis also, I guess.
So we try and stay out of the data analysis as much as possible. And the reason for that is only if the club asks us to do it, because they haven't got time. And one of the reasons for that is because I think there's this perceived perception of bias. Like, everyone looks at papers now, and someone he or she works for that company that's on the paper, and it's showing that it must be biased. It's like the results must be good. So we offer as much help as we can. We put expectations right, and then again, it's that whole balance of like we want to help as much as possible. We'd be willing to do everything, but at the same time, it's understanding that if they don't trust us and they think we'll mess up with the data analysis, then fine, go do it themselves. We'll set everything up to that very point that you guys go do it yourselves, so that you have confidence as a club and an organisation. Like, I'm fortunate because of all the research and hopefully my reputation in the game, like, that people are trusting me, but at the same time, like, I want to be making sure that people can carry on trusting me, not just as Steve Barrett player, make Steve Barrett as the general kind of practitioner. Again, please don't put that in the Ego Goals book or anything like that in the future volume as well. That sounded quite bad then. But it's the whole concept of, it's your responsibility for the club. The club are paying you money. It's your responsibility to make sure whatever you take on board is doing a service to the players at hand. You guys at PSG probably would have got emailed a lot more opportunities from sports tech companies trying to get into the club. But I think it's like our kind of, as the guardians of the club, so to speak, to make sure that nothing comes in or goes to the players that we're not confident in as well.
Yes. So that's the difficulty, because the more wealthy the club, the easier just to get more technology, just to add sensors, just to add tests and monitoring. I'm sure you've read this, the paper that Barry Drust put on Sports Science, Sport Performance report, about the 24 touch points a day that a player can have with sports science within a day, you know. What are your thoughts on that? You know, how much is enough or how much is too much in terms of use of technology in this context?
Again, I'm a big advocate, like, and I hope this isn't sitting on the fence. I'm a big advocate of dealing with the individual as an individual. Like, I still have some of my former players like message me most days, like just asking my opinion and wanting to keep in touch, and they'd come sit down in my office next to me for like half an hour and just chat, and while I'm working, just chat and want to find out as much as possible about their information. I have other players that if I speak to them, like, they'll listen to me politely, and then as soon as like I've told them what they need to know, they'll nod their heads, and then they don't want to hear me the rest of the day. Some players don't want to hear from me for a week, so I'm very much a case of you review the personality, you review the connections, and sometimes if it's not me, I go, okay, I won't speak to that player as much. That staff member has the better connection, so therefore they can do it. Or, okay, sports masseuse, when you are rubbing the player, can you just mention this to that player and just let me know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so it's using different strategies and minimizing those touch points, because I think if you overwhelm someone with something, they're gonna like kind of like fight against it eventually. Like, you imagine as a kid, your mum constantly telling you to clean your room, and you're gonna rebel and say, I don't want to clean my room, don't want to clean my room. Although me and you might have been different, we kept our rooms tidy all the time for all I know. So
of course you didn't want to clean your room, but then now why players are so reluctant to be monitored?
it's they just want to play football. Like in football, like in most sports, some people just go, I made it here because I just played football. Like, and they don't appreciate sometimes the foundations and underpinning kind of extra advantage they can get from listening. So I think I look at the players that have probably succeeded more, like through the just take hold of, because that's most recent memories for me. Like, we had a lot of high profile transfers like go out from us. So we were a selling club. One player go to Leicester, then to Man United. One player go to Liverpool. One player go to West Ham. And I look at those three players, and all three of them have different personality profiles. One used to turn up eating McDonald's in the morning, like for breakfast when I first joined, and then like once eventually left, he was relatively good, but his nutrition was always an issue. Another player like was the loudest in the changing room, but would always listen, but do it in a sense and manner that like he'd take the piss out of you at first, and then then he'd listen and take it on board, and that's why he's at the level he's at. And then the final player, and who's getting touted as like future accolades and that, he would do everything. He would listen, want to learn more, do everything, couldn't do enough. He was constantly asking for more and more and more. So 3 different personalities that have all progressed to a very high standard. And again, I'm sure you can probably say the same. Like, when you get to those higher profile players, for example, like, do you find that they're all challenging and wanting more, or is it that spectrum again? Like, it'd be interesting.
No, I think I definitely agree with you in terms of it's highly individual, what they need, their position in relation to that. But I would say you still have a greater proportion of players who would prefer not to be tested ever than those really willing to know their numbers every day, you know?
By the way, this is what I talk about when you have family time, Martin, by the way. I've got...
Very good.
You're making an appearance on the podcast, John. Cool. So,
that's okay. That's cool.
Family time.
Very good.
So
if you have any advice on the use of to convince people about the use of technology, I'm taking any sort of advice. But no, you see what I mean.
Yeah.
You see what I mean is that if you take I have discussion on another, let's say, level, but it's kind of similar to that with my great friend Jordan Menigushia about the hamstring injury stuff and everything. He started by, okay, how important are injuries, or how injuries are impacting performance and availability? It's big, of course, you know. Who wants to be injured? No one. Okay. So it looks like it's super important, but on the actual, based on facts, players don't want to do their routine, their prevention, so they are kind of uninterested in something that is, in the end, probably one of the most important things in their football life. So why or how do we make them understand that they should do that on the top of just playing football? So the monitoring side, I think to me is a bit the same, is that, come on, if you guys let us monitor you, we're going to have better information on yourself, and we're going to hopefully be able to adapt the training better and tailor to your needs. So just accept. And that's why we as scientists, we need to develop other ways and develop this invisible monitoring, use, thankfully, the good technology so that we can get information without properly testing. But wouldn't it be just easier if those guys were willing to get tested,
It would be, but it'd be boring. I think that's the big...
For them or for us? Or for us as well?
For us, like, it'd just be like... I found it, like, more boring if I just had, like, and this is no disrespect to young players. Young players come up to the first team and just nod their head and they'd go, yep, I'll do this. Like, how high do you want me to jump? I'll jump that high. It's like, we got in this industry, like, to not just do the job, but be challenged on the job because it makes you better. And, like, the whole concept of, like, just having an easy ride doesn't fit well with me. Like, if I'm not being challenged by players or by staff to, like, better, then that to me is like, it's a boring life. Like, you want to be challenged, you want to improve, and you only improve by getting challenged more. So if a player came up to me and just said, oh, I'll do this, I'll do that, no problems. It's like, okay, but I haven't explained to you, like, do we need to talk about why? Like, are you just nodding your head? It's like, oh no, like, the best scenario I remember having was, there was a season gap and it was pre-season. And we did something similar from one pre-season to another. And, like, the player turned around to me at the end of the session and he started citing off, oh, Steve, is this why we do this? And he, like, spent 2 minutes, like, explaining something to me. And I was like, yeah. Like, how do you know that? He went, you told me that last year and I remember it. And I remember, like, how good I felt after it. And that for me is, like, the perfect scenario is that you get challenged on it, they learn. It's how we learn. We don't just sit there and listen to people like Martin and myself and go, right, okay, what he says must be right. Probably people say that about you, Martin, more so than me. They definitely challenge what I say, I must admit. But, like, it's like that. It's like, okay, it sounds like he's right, but let's just check it. Let's challenge it. Okay, what about this? What about that? Like, so for me, like, the easy ride is not fun. The challenge is the bit that is enjoyable.
Makes total sense, and I can't agree more. So let's wrap this specific question on. Thanks to this difficulty of implementation of monitoring, we ended up being more innovative and creative, and that's exactly why I have such an interest for this kind of technology that can allow us to develop this individual monitoring, because we have to be clever.
And it's new. It's new and challenging that we haven't seen before as well. Like, how do we know how many times a player should kick, or what's the best contact time during a technical drill? Who knows? There you go. Go on. What you got?
On that's where I wanted to go about more now, because we discussed a lot about the monitoring fatigue, this contact time stuff as well. So now moving off to the other part that is really even, let's say, newer into the ability to monitor things that we generally don't monitor, because now everyone is using GPSs at least in football and tracking in team sports. Now you guys can have an idea of ball contacts and so on. And I'll start with sharing something as a user, and I'll be interested to see how would you see that on a bigger scale. So typical progression from a return to play player. You look at typical locomotor loads from GPS. You're building up volume at some stage. You're building up high speed. You're building up accel decels. Those kind of waves, but it's building up. It's going up and up. Now you look at ball contacts from day one, back with the ball to back with the team. Most of the time it goes reverse, because the first days you just pass the ball to maybe the physio or the rehab guy, and there's nothing much to do else than just passing. So you ended up doing 200 passes. Not talking only about the intensity, but then the day you're back on the pitch, the possession, you have 12 ball contact during the whole possession, you know. So that made me think a lot about the progression, about the integration of the ball as well.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating one, because when you start to explore like the match demands, and I think like the average amount of time someone spends on the ball is like 90 seconds for 90-minute match play, like a loose kind of ideology, and the number of touches it convert, like you might not touch the ball in a game. I remember when we were in the Premier League, and there was 3 players like who didn't touch the ball in a 90-minute game against like one of the top opposition. So when you come back to actually planning and periodizing like kicking within rehab, like we had a really interesting kind of quad injury. So the player ended a training session, coach was working on some long clearances as back 4. Like players cleared the ball out to the winger, done his quad. And so we then used it, instead of like going, right, well, we need to hit this, we need to hit it. It's like, let's challenge it. Okay. It wasn't necessarily about the volume, it was more the intensity of the kicks. Because again, when you look at hamstring kind of rehab, going back to that kind of example, everyone goes, need to get to 90, 95% and progressive increase in that specific metric for that specific injury. And I'm a big believer, the more specific you can be to that injury, it's like, great, okay, you might get quad tears or pulls, you might get groin issues because of kicking mechanisms. Okay, why are we then rehabbing the physical side? And was there a physical and a technical element in there that we have to rehab alongside each other? Like, so some hamstring injuries, we've seen it where player, like fullback sprinting down the line, goes to receive the ball. Like, it's a stretching mechanism, it's a sprinting mechanism, and it's a technical mechanism. So which one did the injury? Well, like, we don't have a clue. Like, so we have to rehab each one specifically. So I really find it fascinating, like that rehab one where you progress early stage rehab, players are just excited to get outside, so they want to touch the ball. We had a lovely, I would say lovely, we had a really fun culture of like head tennis in the gym, where you get a couple of smart hurdles out, we'd have a bit of space, and like it'd be staff versus players, or it'd be a couple of players versus each other. We never quantified that technical load. So again, is that actually adding stress on? So it's that balance of, it's the same as like if a player walked from his car to a shopping mark, like around the shopping centre in an afternoon, are you going to say he's done too much distance today? He's done like 5k walking around the shops with his wife. Is knowing when to kind of break that. We only monitor what we do on the pitch, realistically. So yeah, the progression of technical action sometimes is reverse progression, and is that because of the, again, you're one-to-one with a player and you're just making them run, like they're gonna get messed up. I've only had a couple of players that really just wanted to run, they didn't want to touch the ball. So if you can distract them with the ball, I think it's a tool of distraction that we use, but it's a way to do it in a smart way now that we can monitor and quantify.
Yeah. And this is definitely going to open a lot of reflection around ball integration, in this case during rehab. Obviously, I took a naive example about just number of touches, but as you said, the most important is the intensity of those touches. But even though, you know, how do you, because I'm sure we can, yeah, as I said, there's a lot of reflection to be around that, because now we use game information, game demands as a kind of a benchmark, get the player ready to run those distance in those zones that he has already achieved half of a match, 60% of a match. And there's so much to do around that, definitely.
Yeah, and again, you look at, so what the coaches prepare for, and when we looked at like the different kind of, just even drills that coaches use within training, that changes so much depending on their tactics, their strategies, the match day, and the technical actions will vary accordingly because of it. Again, you cope with the demands, and realistically, why have we focused on like locomotive activities over the past 10 to 15 years? It's because they're available.
That's easy to measure. That's what we have.
We probably know how to translate that a little bit better than what we do. Like, but we have to start saying you run like a position specific drill that's like you have 20 releases, 5 of them were high intensity. Like, then you have a contact. It's like it becomes more difficult to translate. So, but because ultimately, like, okay, this player does 10 high speed releases. He's a right centre back and he pings the ball along to the. I mean, you might be more used to passing on the ball, but seeing that long diagonal pass, like, okay, how often does he train that in a game? How often does he train it in training? And when can we do that? Is it good for him to practice it the day before again? And the thing that I always liked was on a Friday at Hull, that was the biggest technical load of the week, because like it was perceived as reducing the physical output, but letting the players get that mental preparation. And the guys from Norwich and Glenn Lewis and Chris Domgala before he left, like with the papers just being accepted last week, but they actually had the lowest technical actions performed on the match day -1. So you've got 2 clubs where it's fascinating for me that at Hull we rehearsed kind of technical actions on a Friday. So was that actually detrimental to match play performance because of that? Because of, like, again, were we causing muscle damage or limitations? Again, it's these questions that you want to ask and find answers for. We talked earlier about asking one question and asking further 10, and that's where it came to, whereby crossing and finishing. So it's like you've got fullbacks wanting to do like 5 to 10 crosses. Okay, is that fine? What if they pull a groin? Like, but again, it's good for performance. So what's that breaking point between performance and risk of injury? But the thing that challenged me the most the last couple of seasons before I left, there was one player at Hull who actually liked to do speed endurance the day before a game. He'd just done it all day before the game. Okay. So he'd start off full length pitch, halfway line, sprint to the byline, sprint the full length of the pitch, and then finish the halfway line. And he wanted to do that in 25 to 30 seconds and 4 reps. And I was like, okay, like I've never seen this before. I wouldn't normally recommend it. And you've done this all your career. Let's challenge it and let's see what your response is. Okay. But then he started playing well, so then you had more players wanting to do it, and it's like, okay, like he's used to it. Like, so it challenges the mindset even then from a physical point of view. It's like, we might not recommend it, but does it mean it's not right for one player? And
you have to respect. Him to start with.
Exactly. It's understanding why, and eventually that player came away from wanting to do 4 to 6 to then actually I said, well, let's try this. Let's do 1 this week, 2 next week, and then when it's international break, we'll do like more. And so you try and help periodize it a little bit more and help them feel good, but educate. And I see the same with like the technical actions. It's like we don't fully know what the implications are for doing certain technical actions. We can only guess it.
Exactly.
And that's why I think I'm really keen in this area, is because like I don't want to stop coaches ever doing anything, like, but I want them to be informed of everything that they're doing so they can make appropriate decisions accordingly. I think that's what we should be throughout any of our kind of passageways. It's like me and you work together, Martin. I ultimately want to come to you and say, right, like, what do you think? This is the problem. This is like scenario 1, this is scenario 2. Probably get this if we do this, but we might get this. That's ultimately the job of like head coach. Like, if I pick this player, we might get this performance, or if I pick, it's trying to come to terms with the management side of it as well.
I think what you just said, this is music to my ears, you know, when you said you don't want to tell them what to do, you want to respect them and let them what they want to do. But let's say we are here to observe, analyze, and maybe advice on the back of those analyses or measurements. And, you know, there are so many people in our industry that just come in and say, you guys should be doing this, you know. And this is just such a discredit for what we are trying to do, because there's not, again, we're back to, that's my word at the moment, you know, but we are like, there's no empathy in this side. It's my way, because I have the technology and the PhD. So listen,
guys. Inigo Majika kind of summarized it quite nicely in one of his presentations, and other people might have used it as well, but that's just the one I remember. Like, it was the lions and the cheetahs and the monkeys. Have you heard that analogy before, where lions, the manager, cheetahs are the players, where the monkeys in the trees just playing? And the rules of the jungle, so to speak. So,
I think that comes from Dave Martin initially. And then I think we were a few to steal it, but yeah, of course, respect the other species, and because you'll never be a lion if you were not born like a big cat or any of those.
Exactly. So, and everyone's got different journeys. Like, if you've got a manager that's won Champions Leagues and stuff like that, okay, like, well, how did you win the Champions League? Was it just because you had players? Did you have the best training methodologies? Was it this? Like, it's like if Pep Guardiola, for example, was to go and manage like a League Two team, like in England, or like if he was to go to a random team in a different league, like, would he have the same impact that he's having at Man City? And how would he then impact that as well? Like, it's, yeah. So I'm really fascinated by that whole kind of concept of you support the person that you're trying to help. Like, if they want you to tell them what to do, you can do, but you should always make sure that they know what the options are and how you came to that decision as well. Otherwise, it's I think that's one of the biggest frustrations. Really early in my career, I always remember, like, when I worked at Scunthorpe, the academy manager who I was working with, like, we had a conversation the day before, and he was like, "Oh, I think it's a rubbish idea. The following morning, he came to me and said, "I've got this great idea." And he basically said the idea, which was what I said the day before. And I got really frustrated at the time. And that was the big light bulb moment for me. Like, I know the light's above my head, so it helps. But it was like, well, if that's impacted the academy manager, in order to take on board the message that I was trying to get across to him, even if I'm frustrated, is that actually a good thing that it's going to get done? Like, and that's kind of like was the big eureka moment for me, where it's like, all of a sudden, like, it's an impact, but it's a hidden impact, so to speak.
Yeah, it's not coming straight from you, but in the end, who cares?
Exactly, and that's the hardest thing I think some people have to face, is that it's not all about me. It's, again, and you know, you're smiling because you've written a lot about it in the ego books recently, but like, it's really important that, like, ultimately, as long as the goal is trying to be achieved and it's everyone's rowing in the right direction and trying to support, then it doesn't matter how you get there, because it's a team objective.
Yeah, I got some very nice quotes from you thrown in that ego book. That's, you know, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you with us as well. I'm conscious of the time, and I think we could speak another hour on that. Just moving on a little bit, just to finish off with a few a bit more personal question. I think that's always nice to finish the podcast with a few things like that. First thing, I mean, to other listeners, you have any tips around managing your time, mixing that with family, working remotely? What saves your energy and time?
It's a good question. I think, to be honest with you, just self-reflection, like, and allowing time for self-reflection is really important. Like, I think one of the big things that, like, when I was working in professional sport, you get used to being there for the team. Like, not many staff members would turn around and say, "Oh, can I have like 2 days off to go to my brother's wedding, like a weekend, for example?" And that sometimes is wrong. It's like, there's really important things in life that happen while you're working in professional sport that, I know, it's a sacrifice that you make. Now, and again, I learnt a lot from Rob when I was at Hull with him, and when he worked at the FA, he lost probably like 2 to 4 years worth of his little boy's life because he was on the road with the FA, going from camp to camp. And his little boy, like, again, just that story and what he told me about that, I was like, I don't ever want that. It's like, as much as I want to succeed in this kind of environment and professionally be the best that I can be, I also want to be the best dad as well, and I want to be the best husband, and I want to be and that's a challenge itself, and I want to keep fit, and I want to exercise. Like, so it's, you do it with work, you prioritize what's most important, and then you work back through. So unfortunately, some things will have to give way, but at the same time, like, okay, like maybe going and playing with my little boy for half an hour and like might be what's on the agenda next before his bedtime, but I know that I can catch up with work later on at night. And we spoke about it before we started, it's like when you go away with work, it's like you actually probably work 2 days within the time that you're away, because when you're actually at home, you want to make sure that you've got that time. And I think when I reflect back on it, even when I was traveling with the club and that, even if I was doing that, because of what was required towards the end, I was still there was no separation. And I think as soon as I got that, it was managing it. So the bits of advice I'd just say is ultimately like, make sure that you manage your personal life away from professional life as well. If you get that right, then you're in a good place. But it's very, very difficult to do that within professional sport. Like, I'm sure you're the same now as well, Martin, balancing 3, 4, 5 maybe different roles as well. Like, I lose track of like what you're doing, which is a good thing, but again, it's really prioritize what's important to you, and prioritize what's important, that's going to be the most important things to you when you retire, when you're 70, 80, you're sat on a chair, you're looking out at the sun, like maybe in Marbella, maybe somewhere else sunny, or looking out at the snow in England, and you'd say, I'm proud of what I did. And who's going to be there to help you? Is it the players that are going to be there, or is it the staff that are going to be at the football club, or is it going to be your family? Are they going to be the ones that are going to be there throughout the whole time?
Exactly. Yeah. But when you are in the hamster wheel, chasing the logo again, there's no way you think like that. You know, you just want to make sure you get the logo and eventually a post on Instagram. You know. All right. Is there any question that I did not ask and you would have loved to chat about before we wrap up?
I think we've probably gone on a few tangents and done all that, but no, I think like, to be honest, I think the one thing I was going to ask you that when we chatted about the conversation, that was, again, be interested to hear about your kind of how you balance things as well, but also like one of the big challenges for me is that if you were to get a blank canvas and have your time again in any club, so say it was Lille and there was no support staff, there was no nothing, like how would you kind of manage what you want to do ultimately? How we talk about priorities in professional life and we talk about priorities in family life. Like, this question that I'll ask is, has your priorities changed from when you first started as a practitioner to your priorities now? Okay,
so
question for you, yeah.
Nice. But you have to give me your opinion on that as well. No, I think I'm sure you have the same opinion as well. When you get more experience, whether it is training, use of technology, nutrition, whatever, you just simplify everything and you just go, the big rocks are getting bigger and bigger, and the peppers and the sound, you don't even think about it. So get the big rocks done. So training wise, if you don't do properly your recovery and your prevention, forget about a specific exercise. Technology, if you don't have a proper load monitoring or simple measure of response to load, you don't need to get other fancy tools. So it's really making sure you really understand your big rocks. And I've just been, as I said, bigger. The same rocks became bigger and bigger, and I've kind of cleaned and did not give as much interest as I was given before for the others. Simplifying a lot.
And because it amazed me. One of the best things to do in my career, like in my opinion, was start off at like a low level kind of club, and when I mean low level, they had low budget, so you had to really shout or work around like what you needed. I think your description kind of summarizes it quite well, whereby the amount of young practitioners who maybe get a job at like low level teams, so it may be fourth or fifth division, they go, oh, I need GPS. Why do you need GPS? Like, go do RPE. Have you measured how much time your players are doing in training before you get to that? And it's like, start at the very basics. What is the priority for you? Have you spoken to the coach about what they want you to do? Have you engaged with the coach so that when you want to progress the program, you can do it? And I think that's the art that's kind of lost, is that sometimes science is now seen as technology as opposed
yes.
and we talked about that before the podcast, but again, that was something to raise, is that like sports science practitioners, like the fundamentals is like the discipline underneath it, which wasn't designed by technology. Technology is there to complement it. And I think really complementing your practice, whether that be your football knowledge, your coaching knowledge, your conditioning knowledge, or even supporting medical staff to get there, it's important to really ask the right questions and find the right solutions to answer those questions.
Yes. And in this case, the technology should only help you to find out something that you can't without, of course, or help you to make a point on something. I think good example is training load related use of GPS. Let's say your coaching staff as often tends to replicate the same session match day -1 as this routine, same drills. So once you monitor this session once or twice or 5 times, it's almost, you don't need to re-monitor this session throughout the season, because you know what's going to happen. It's based on player numbers and spaces. So the technology becomes a little bit redundant. But again, back to return to play, you want to hit some certain thresholds. Is it about reaching 28 or 30 kilometers? I don't think any one of us has that in the eyes to make the difference by 1 or 2, 3 kilometers. So thinking that we're going to make this is important in the rehab process, that's another discussion, you know. But there are things, measuring contact time before and after a heavy HIIT session, there's no way your eyes can look at that. So here the technology to me is useful and is going to bring something more. But often, how many GPS reports are created and not even looked at when it's day -2 or day -1, when you just do the same sessions? 3 hours of work for the sports scientist guys, not even a blue tick on WhatsApp, you know?
Yeah.
You know.
The blue tick of doom. No, it's a nice way to end that. So thank you, Martin. And thank you again for the opportunity to speak as well. I appreciate it.
No, it's been brilliant. It's been brilliant. I think, kind of almost as a way to wrap up together, you know, I really wanted to have your insights initially about what you guys were trying to do with Player Maker. Again, without any intention to favor a technology versus another, but I believe so much myself in this approach of this invisible monitoring, getting sensors on players, and then getting some information on the muscular status without, of course, doing a proper test. So that's really, I wanted to discuss that with you. And I'm glad we also moved a little bit toward more your experience about having players buying, respecting coaches' opinions, and working to support them, and withdrawing yourself as an individual to put you behind a project. We just said that just what we should all be doing, but this is not always the practice in this competitive football world. It was good to hear that.
No, thank you. And I think that's where the benefit of people like yourself, and hopefully like people like myself and the university kind of consultants or mentors, whoever are out there, that's why it's important to have those outside voices to a club sometimes, is to really just say, like, well, if you haven't got time, you either make time or you don't do it. Like, and it's as simple as that, really. Like I should have mentioned, like at Hull, I still use GPS system and Playmaker combined because of all the historical data that we have. Like it's not one or the other. It's like the questions I was asking a Playmaker was mainly from the technical and gait analysis side. I was still asking the locomotive time motion data from GPS, and I think that's where you can use technology in combination. It's not one or the other. and it's just making sure you have a good fluid kind of data processing that can bring it all together as well. If you have that, so the sports scientist or performance analyst doesn't have to spend 3 hours creating a report, that's the biggest and best thing as well. Like, so they can actually have conversations with coaches and conversations with players.
Yeah, favor conversation over the time spent crunching numbers. Oh yes. All right. All right, we're gonna leave it here. As you said, we went already over the hour, so that's very good. Thanks again, Steve. I'll put anything you want us to put on the podcast page in terms of contacts or any useful link. We'll do that on offline later on.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thanks for your time and
no worries. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you.
Appreciate that, and speak to you soon.